Hi, I'm Heather Stang. This is a recording from my free monthly Living with Grief workshop, where we explore grief through mindfulness, self-care, and self-compassion. Each live session includes a teaching, a guided practice, and a live Q&A session. The Q&A is not recorded here to protect the privacy of those who attend live. But if you would like to join a future live workshop and ask me anything you want about grief, you'll find the registration link in the description, or you can visit heatherstang.com. I'm Heather Stang, for those of you who don't know, and I'm doing this because it's my life's mission to help people cope with grief and loss. And my grief journey started when I was 7, and my uncle died by suicide. And my mother had to tell me that had happened and what that was. And I imagine that was probably one of the most difficult moments of her life, not only losing her brother, but having to tell me. But I will say, considering it was 1977 and people, I'm not saying that people talk about grief in a literate way all the time now, but back then they really didn't, especially those traumatic losses. And she is probably the one person who really did a great job holding space for me. And maybe as a 7-year-old, I did for her. I don't know. But the rest of my family, they did not talk about it. They did not address it. And that rift in not communicating around loss and feelings echoed until this day, although now it's just my mom and I who are left, really. But it created a lot of strain in the family system. And my hope is that by supporting other people through loss, that you will have easier relationships with yourself, with the people that remain, and those continuing bonds that you have with the person. My Uncle Doug died again. 1977 was a while ago, but we still talk about him. We still think about him. In fact, this Christmas, we went to this restaurant that my grandmother had always told me that Doug worked at. Always. She was like, Doug, you worked here. And my mom and I are approaching the building, and I was like, Doug worked here. My mom's, no, he didn't. He never worked in a restaurant. So, like, even to this day, we're learning, and he's still a part of our memory. And I've had many other people die since then. And that is, I'm not going to go through the whole list because this isn't about me, it's about you. But I just think it's important for you to know that I'm here for probably a similar reason you are, and that's to connect with people who get it. So thank you all so much again for being here and for sharing in the chat. We've got a lot of different types of losses in this room. And today is really about making your loss matter to you as it does, but not worrying about what other people are experiencing or how long it's been. It's your very personal love and loss story. So the way today is going to go is I have a little slide presentation that I'm going to walk you through, and then we're going to do a little bit of practice. And then we are going to have some sharing time, and you can ask your questions and I will do my best to answer them. We talked about how grief can feel incredibly isolating, and a lot of us wonder if our experience is normal, whatever that is, because does grief feel normal? Not at all. But there are certainly commonalities that we see in people who are grieving, and some of these might resonate with you, some of these might not. But the first one is you might be feeling overwhelmed or anxious or deeply sad. Sometimes you might not even know why. Sometimes you know it's tied to the loss. If you are, let's just say, 5 years out and you're feeling particularly moody one day, and we'll talk about this a little later. You might be feeling grief because an anniversary is coming up or because something in your environment has touched that grief. You won't feel sad forever, but grief reactions certainly come and go. If you're missing your special person and it touches all aspects of your life, not just emotionally, but in those small, ordinary moments throughout your day. You might feel isolated and no one understands what you are going through, even those people closest to you or other people who are being supportive, excuse me. It's not uncommon for people to feel physical symptoms, including pain, insomnia, nausea, exhaustion, muscle tension, and wonder, why is grief so physical? And we'll talk about that a little bit later too. Headaches are common, things you just wouldn't expect, these somatic reactions to loss. You might feel restless or not sure how to move through your day, completely disoriented. You might be struggling with the changes in roles, responsibilities, or finances, and carrying the practical stress along the emotional loss. Some of you might be experiencing what we call secondary losses, and those are those tangible things that follow a loss. If the person who died was the person who took care of paying the bills, like you lost that internal bookkeeper, you lost the person who might pick up the kids from school, those add on to what's already a very painful experience. And one of the most inevitable questions in grief, and I'll say the first question I hear from people is, it's more of a statement, but there's a question implied. I don't know how I'm going to get through this. I hear that all the time. And then another inevitable question is, but I thought I was doing so well. And this comes when people have started to maybe focus more on the story of love and the memories of the person and aren't feeling quite as overwhelmed by the emotional roller coaster that we experience as grief. And then the third inevitable question, and these two are not in any particular order, but is, who am I now? If you're a parent who lost a child, that changes your role. If you've lost a spouse, that changes your role. Any type of loss is going to constantly bring up that question, because as humans, we see ourselves through that lens of relationship, especially when it's someone we are grieving. That means we've spent enough time with them in our life, and it's going to disrupt the things we do. And who do we go to talk to? A lot of you might be feeling like the person you want to talk to about your grief is the person who isn't here anymore. And that can be an especially cruel feeling. And if you're looking for a roadmap to navigate life after loss, then we'll talk about that a little bit too. So grief impacts all of you. And a lot of times we think of grief as just an emotional experience, but it lives in the physical body. And we know from the tension, restlessness, fatigue, headaches, changes in our sleep patterns, that our body isn't the same. And we're experiencing a lot of stress, and that can lead to illness and accidents and all sorts of things. So the first thing I work with my clients is taking care of our physical bodies. And that means trying to get some water, some food, some movement, and some sleep back into our everyday schedule. Easier said than done if you're in early grief, but there are things you can do to help your body move out of that fight, flight, freeze response and come back into a state of equilibrium. So then you can deal with the emotions and the feelings. And those you're probably all too familiar with. And there are a wide range of emotions that show up, from sadness, anger, guilt, longing, relief in some cases, sometimes a really uncomfortable sense of relief if the person was struggling or if the relationship was particularly difficult and challenging. There can be a sense of relief, numbness, even moments of calm. These can all exist side by side and sometimes simultaneously. So I don't see any kind of emotion as good or bad or right or wrong. I look at emotions as messengers. They are telling you what is happening. Anger often covers up fear or a sense that you couldn't control something. And so we don't see anger as something that's bad. It's something that can help you understand your experience a little more clearly. Things like sadness and longing, those are just natural byproducts of missing somebody that you love deeply. And then there's our behaviors. You might withdraw from the activities that you used to do. You might avoid social settings. You might cling tightly to your rituals and routines. Some people find going back to work is normalizing. Other people find it makes them feel stark raving mad because you can't focus or the people around you are acting like nothing has changed. So it's different for different people. But the reality is, we can all probably look at how we're moving through our day and see some behaviors. That could also include things like drinking more alcohol, eating more food, eating less food, that kind of thing. Your spiritual and religious outlook will often change. Either you might find you lean in more to your spiritual beliefs and that they're very supportive, or you may find that you are seeking other ways of looking at the world and wider perspective of life. Relationships are often impacted as well. You might feel isolated or misunderstood, even by the people who care very deeply about you. Family roles can change, friendships may shift, but you might also find that your relationships deepen. A lot of times people will share that they've lost some friends but gained new ones. Somebody might reach out that has had a similar loss that you weren't close to before, and suddenly they're your new best friend because you can understand each other. And then finally, grief affects the mind. And I have a whole slide on this because how the brain reacts to grief explains a lot of that sense that we are going crazy. And I'm using that word not very lightly because so many of my clients say, I feel like I'm losing my mind or I feel like I'm going crazy. And I can attest that even after I almost had my master's degree in death, dying, and bereavement when my stepdad unexpectedly died. And I felt like I was losing my mind. And this is a common experience. And what's happening is our brain expects our loved one to be present, right? Our heart knows, like our heart is one thing, our emotions is one thing, but there's this whole thing happening on the subconscious level. It's actually seeking out where they are. Like right now in this moment, you could probably think about someone in your life who is living that's very close to you, and you have this felt sense of where they are in the world. And when somebody dies and that felt sense gets challenged, your brain goes into overdrive scanning for them. And because there is that mismatch between expectations and reality, we have all these cognitive challenges such as brain fog, confusion, disorientation, stress, disorganization, forgetting to show up for things. I just had a meeting with a new member in my grief group, and she was a little bit late and very apologetic. And I was like, it's grief. Like I expect people to be late. I know that I'm not saying that I don't have faith in people, but like I understand the grieving brain. It's very scattered and it's exhausted and it's hard to remember things. So if you feel like you have been misplacing things or losing things more or missing meetings or you can't read as well as you used to or focus as well as you used to. This is all a normal part of grief. And as Mary Frances O'Connor, who did this neurological research on the grieving brain, says, if we think about grief as a way of learning, we are learning how to grieve, we are learning how to navigate the world as it is now. Our brain has to learn that the person isn't in the next room. Then that at least gives us something we can do. That gives us a process. So that's part of why I call this living with loss, is we're learning how to engage in this life that we still have, given all the changes that we've experienced. So grief shows up in all these little moments because love lives in all these little moments. And we're slowly learning how to carry that loss into everyday life, one moment at a time. Then there's also the big days. So that last slide was really about why on any given Wednesday you might feel completely overwhelmed and confused. But then there are these big days, and I wanted to include this since we're having this conversation at the start of the new year, because as we cross in from one year to the next, we can feel like there's this either leaving them behind in the last year, which, by the way, you never leave them behind. You're always going to carry them with you. That is the nature of love. But we can also feel like there's some anxiety around this big blank slate of a year where we know we're going to have to go through anniversaries and birthdays and holidays without the person. And I see this anticipatory anxiety show up in myself, in my clients. I even could see it in my grandmother when she had dementia. There were things that she would do around anniversaries that were very surprising. But if I go into that story, we'll be here all day. So I'm going to focus on this. So the body remembers meaningful dates. Like we have it on our calendar and we remember it, but there's something about the way the light hits at a certain time of year, the smell of the flowers, the temperature, where it's like we intuitively know something is coming up. So anniversaries, birthdays, holidays, and other important days connected to a loss can register in our body long before we think about it. And so for many of us, as one of these dates approach, our nervous system starts to prepare and brace. This happens automatically. And it's because the body is trying to protect us from the pain it remembers, even if you're not actively thinking about the day. Now, for many people, the anticipation of that day is actually harder than the day itself. That waiting, the wondering how it's going to feel, the uncertainty of how the day is going to go can keep the nervous system on high alert. And the stress response can show up in many ways, like anxiety, restlessness, somatic symptoms, irritability, difficulty concentrating, just feeling off, and you can't quite explain why. And anticipatory anxiety is not a sign that you're going backwards or you're doing anything wrong. It's just letting you know, like difficult emotions, that something is off. So, one of the things that I created, and this is something you can find on my website. Actually, heck, I'll just send it out to list after this to make it easy, but is a special day planner. And that's the kind of worksheet that I create for my clients. And it helps you ahead of time, like maybe a month or two before one of these big special days comes around, to actually plan out how that day can be meaningful to you. And just by putting attention on what am I going to do on this special day can completely remove that anxiety. It asks you to look at how you're feeling about it, your emotions, to think about what special memories you might want to weave into the day, if there are any special objects you want to have with you, who you want to be around, who you don't want to be around. And what coping skills you have to handle the day. And many people shared with me that the anxiety itself of an approaching special day is much more difficult than the day itself. The day is often surprisingly meaningful if things are planned. And when I talk about meaning, obviously, we're not talking about pretending like we are okay with what happened. Nobody is okay with what happened. That's not what this is. It's about trying to shift the texture from where we focus solely on the loss and the anxiety and the stress, and we create a lot more space for the love and the meaning and the memory and why this person mattered to us. Because that is how you live with loss, is when you can show up and take care of yourself, when you can acknowledge how you really feel, and you can actually do something meaningful about it. And I mentioned earlier how it could be five years down the road, 10 years down the road when some of these feelings come up. And so if you're listening, you're here and you're in early grief, I'm letting you know this for future you, but right now you don't have to take it in. We know that grief does not move in a straight line, that there isn't a finish line. There's no steady upward progression, whatever that means, that it's more like waves that rise and fall over time. And that these emotional waves are part of adapting to the loss, that your nervous system, heart, and mind are learning how to carry love and absence together. And that learning doesn't happen all at once. It's one step at a time. We know that strong feelings can return even when you are coping well, hence that quite often muttered statement, but I was doing so well, and why people start to feel like they're stuck. And they're not actually stuck, they're just encountering a wave of grief. And it doesn't mean that the work you've already done didn't matter. It just means in this particular moment, you're feeling what you feel. The waves are usually signs of triggers, sometimes conscious, sometimes unconscious, rather than a sign of failure, a memory, a meaningful date, stress, fatigue, and even positive things like a child getting married or moving into a new home can bring up all sorts of loss. And over time, it's not about eliminating the waves, but to use the metaphor, to learn how to ride them. And each time you meet one of these waves with awareness and compassion, you're building resilience for yourself. And the waves are going to still come, but the more often you face them, the more manageable and less frightening you'll feel. Grief doesn't ask you to pretend everything's okay. It just invites you to stay with yourself through it. So today we're going to look a little bit towards mindfulness and how it can help you. You might know that what I'm known for is mindfulness and grief. I created an 8-step system that uses mindfulness and tools to help people navigate loss. And we're not going to go through all 8 today because that takes a while. And like I said, you can't learn it all at once. But we are going to focus on this idea of mindfulness as being present. So mindfulness helps you notice what's happening just as it is. Sometimes I joke with my group, why on earth would we want to pay attention to what's happening when what we are experiencing is incredibly painful? And the answers varied. We're not saying that you always have to turn towards what hurts. You don't have to soak yourself in pain. Sometimes mindfulness is about understanding that in this moment, what I'm experiencing is too painful to be with. And so the healthier option would be to focus my attention on something else. That's different from numbing or distracting. Skillfully choosing where to place your attention might be going outside for a walk and taking one step at a time and focusing on the movement of your body. Or if you feel safe with the difficult emotion, mindfulness might be sitting down and really feeling where that difficult emotion is in your body. So, right off the bat, I want you to understand mindfulness isn't about forcing yourself to feel or experience something you don't want to. It's about giving yourself a system and a method to either skillfully give yourself a break and find safety, or turn towards and process and tend to what is hurting so that it can be metabolized, so that it doesn't linger with you forever. So, mindfulness helps you notice what's happening in the moment without judging your experience. And it usually begins by simply recognizing our sensory experiences: smell, sight, sound, sensation, even thoughts. And by paying attention to what's happening in your body and what you feel, that gives you some space between the feeling and the reaction. So it allows you to pause rather than react on autopilot. And this can be especially helpful when emotions feel really intense or overwhelming. Mindfulness supports your nervous system. And when you gently anchor your attention in something steady, like the present moment, it gives your body a signal of safety. Doesn't make grief disappear, but it can reduce the feeling of being flooded. It can take you to that place where you feel less overwhelmed and more able to focus on what you're really feeling. And over time, mindfulness will shift you from trying to escape or fix grief or relating to it in a detached or dissociative way. And it really invites you to ask this question: how can I meet this moment with care? How can I show up for myself in a compassionate, loving way? How can I give myself the thing that I crave from other people? And so steadiness doesn't come from forcing yourself to feel better, or that awful word, moving on, but it comes through presence. And so every time you pause and meet yourself with kindness, whether that's turning towards or skillfully turning away from what's happening, you are strengthening your capacity to live with grief. I gave you so many words just then, but right here is really my favorite definition of mindfulness, and it's an image, not words. So we're not talking about emptying your mind or forcing yourself to feel calm. It's simply paying attention in the present moment with openness, curiosity, and kindness. So it's about noticing what's happening right now. And on the right-hand side, you see the person in the red, and they're completely distracted and lost in thought. And the things that are in their head are not actually happening in the moment. And then the person on the left in the green, they are noticing the trees and the sky and the path in front of them. They are present. The reality is, most of us are probably somewhere in the middle. It's a continuum when you think about it. And it's not about doing this perfect. Neither of these is wrong per se. These are just two states that us humans tend to go into. So I'm going to invite you to pause a moment. We'll do a little longer practice in a moment, but this is just in this moment. Do you feel more like the person noticing the trees? Or do you feel more like the person caught up in thought? And is it possible to not judge yourself for however you are right now? Because the practice is that if you notice that your mind is busy or racing or overwhelmed or anxious, that you don't criticize yourself, that you don't shut yourself down. And this is where that second very important piece of mindfulness comes in. The first piece is clear, seeing clearly what's happening. The second piece is compassion, not scolding yourself for your pain or for lashing out because you were grieving or whatever's coming up, but remembering that you can always begin again. You can always turn to yourself and you can always show up with kindness. So, those are, again, those two practices of clear seeing and compassion are something we're going to work with in this meditation that I'm going to lead you through now. So I invite you, if you would like, you could close your eyes or you could find a point in front of you on which to gaze softly. Whatever's going to make you feel more present. For some of us, closing our eyes helps. For others, being able to see what's in front of us works. And I like to begin with sound quite often because the sounds in the room might be your heater or your air conditioning, most likely heater today. That's happening, but it's neutral. Or you might hear some birds chirping outside or some other noises coming from inside the house. It's settling. My voice. There might also be sounds inside your body. And I'm going to give you a moment of silence here for you to just notice sound. And so, in these first few moments of paying attention, you've probably already noticed your mind drifting off somewhere else. And that's okay. That's part of being human. So, I'm going to give you a few more moments of silence. And during this part, each time you notice that you are no longer hearing, that you're thinking more or feeling more, just begin again. It's no big deal. In fact, think of it as practice, not performance. So I'll give you a few moments to just hear. I'm going to add on one more instruction to this. You don't have to go out and find the sound. Let the sound come to you. Now begin to notice sound and breath. You don't have to breathe in any particular way, but if you would like, you could take a few full, expansive inhales, maybe slowing it down a little bit before exhaling. And to give your mind something else to focus on, each time you exhale, silently to yourself, say these words, breathing out. Breathing out. So you're repeating those words silently to yourself each time you exhale. And again, your breath can be full and expansive or natural and easy. You're focused on the words. You're noticing your breath. You might also be noticing sound. And anytime you notice you are no longer saying those words, breathing out, just say, oh, and start again. Now release those words. Simply notice natural, easy breath coming and going, while simultaneously noticing any sounds that arise, noticing sensations in your body, noticing smells in the room. And notice how, by paying attention to this present moment, you are in some very real way showing up for yourself because you're paying attention to your experience. And since you are showing up for yourself right now, if you'd like, if it feels right to you, you could place your hand on your heart or somewhere else and imagine what it would be like to offer yourself some words of kindness and care. Maybe these are words you would like to hear from others. Maybe it's a wish. May I be free from suffering. Maybe it's encouragement. This is hard, and I'm doing my best. Just notice what comes up and imagine that the part of you that cares deeply about your experience is speaking to the part of you that is hurting. Now you can release your hands and release those words and just notice your breath and notice your body and thank yourself for showing up for you in these moments. And now think back over what this experience was like for you and consider what stood out to you from it. If you happen to have brought your journal, you could write that down, or you could just tuck it away in your mind and try to remember it. Or you could also share it when we do our conversation in a moment. But right here, right now, just take a second to acknowledge what stood out for you and find your way to transition out of this meditation practice and back into this group.
Thank you for spending this time with me and with yourself. This work is inspired by my book, Living with Grief, and by many years of supporting people living with loss. If you would like to join a future Living with Grief workshop, you can find the registration link in the description below or visit heatherstang.com. Please feel free to share this, and until we meet again, be kind to your grieving heart.